Whoops. The word came out soft and wet with laughter, and it was the most dangerous word specialist Kevin Doyle had ever said, though he would not understand that for another 40 minutes. He was 23 years old, broad through the shoulders, with the compact physical confidence of a man who has been the biggest thing in every room since he was 16. He stood in the parking lot of the PX at Fort Riley, Kansas, in the hard, flat light of a July afternoon, and he was laughing. He was laughing because the old man's coffee was on the asphalt now, spreading in a brown crescent around the paper cup he had knocked from the old man's hand with a shoulder that was, technically, an accident. Technically, the old man it had come from had not fallen. This seemed to mildly disappoint Doyle, or at least to deprive him of the outcome he had been half expecting when he clipped the narrow shoulder at speed while his two friends watched from the hood of the car behind them. He was 82 years old, 5'8", and he had been walking with the unhurried deliberateness of a man who has learned that the ground will wait for him. He had absorbed the contact and kept his feet with the automatic, practiced ease of a body that has been hit before and knows the first thing you do is keep your feet. His name was August Fenimore. He wore a pale blue short-sleeve shirt, dark trousers, and worn leather shoes, and he carried nothing now because the coffee was on the ground. He looked at the coffee for a moment. Then he looked at Specialist Doyle. His face told you nothing and everything. The deep lines around his mouth and eyes had arranged themselves into an expression of complete, unhurried assessment. The face of a man examining a situation to determine what it actually requires. His eyes were pale gray, the color of overcast prairie sky, and they were steady in the way that things are steady when they have been still for a very long time and have no intention of moving. He did not speak. Doyle spread his hands, the universal gesture of a man performing an apology he does not mean for an audience he does not respect. My bad, old-timer. He glanced back at his two friends. One of them was grinning. Didn't see you there. He said it the way people say things they know are not true, enjoying the knowing. August Fenimore looked at him for another moment. Then he bent, slowly, and picked up the empty cup. He straightened. He held the cup for a moment and then placed it in the trash can 6 feet away with a precision that was not fussiness but rather the habit of a man who has spent his life putting things where they belong. He turned back to Doyle. That was deliberate, he said. His voice was low and unhurried, the voice of a man making a factual statement, carrying no particular heat. You don't need to pretend otherwise. Doyle's grin sharpened. Something had just been offered to him, the possibility of a better performance, and he took it. He stepped closer. Not close enough to be physical, but close enough to be a statement about who owned the space between them. He was 8 inches taller and 60 years younger, and he was wearing the uniform of the United States Army, and the old man was wearing a pale blue shirt. And he understood all of these things and moved with them. Careful, Pops, he said. His voice had taken on the particular softness that precedes cruelty in men who have practiced it. This is a military installation. You need to watch where you're going. He paused. Or stay home. August Fenimore looked at him without blinking. Are you stationed here? He said. 3rd Infantry Brigade. Doyle lifted his chin. You? I was, the old man said. Doyle's friends had drifted closer. One of them said something quietly. Doyle half turned to receive the comment and laughed, a short, genuine laugh that was worse than the performed one because it was real. He turned back. Look, man, he said, just watch yourself, all right? Some of us actually have things to do. He moved to step around the old man, and his shoulder came forward, and it connected with August Fenimore's chest, not hard enough to knock him down, hard enough to be unmistakable, and Doyle kept walking. And behind him his two friends followed, and one of them was still laughing. The parking lot absorbed the sound of their boots on the asphalt, and went quiet. The heat at Fort Riley in July sits in the air like a physical weight, pressing down on the flat Kansas plain from a sky so large and so white-blue that looking at it directly feels like a question with no answer. The PX parking lot smelled of hot asphalt and exhaust and the distant institutional smell of the base itself. Cut grass, diesel, cleaning solution, the particular combination that means army. A sparrow was working the edge of the lot near the cart return. Somewhere across the installation, beyond the low buildings and the water tower, the flat crack of the artillery range carried faintly on the still air. August Fenimore stood and watched Doyle walk away. His right hand had moved, while Doyle was laughing, to the breast pocket of his pale blue shirt. It rested there now, the fingers curved over what was inside, a small flat rectangle of metal no larger than a playing card, worn at the corners, the surface etched with a unit insignia that had been his for 34 years and would be his until there was no more him. A dog tag. Not a standard issue aluminum tag. A brass one, hand-stamped, made for him by a master sergeant in the summer of 1965, who had told him that a man going where they were going deserved something that would last longer than aluminum. He held it through the fabric of his shirt. The parking lot vanished. The heat remained, but it became a different heat. The dense, animate heat of triple canopy jungle that does not merely warm the air, but replaces it, fills every breath with moisture and green rot, and the particular smell of a place that is very old and indifferent to the people moving through it. The asphalt became mud. The sparrow became silence. The flat artillery crack became the sound of small arms fire. Distant. Then less distant. Then calibrated by a professional ear into something with a direction and a rate that meant specific things about specific conditions. August Fenimore was 24 years old, and he was in the Central Highlands of Vietnam in August of 1965, and he was moving through secondary growth on a trail that was not a trail toward a sound that was organized in a way he did not like. He was a staff sergeant, young for it, and he had 8 men behind him, and a radio that worked intermittently, and a situation that had been developing for 6 hours in a direction that the briefing had not anticipated, and that August had been anticipating since the second hour. His team was a long-range reconnaissance patrol, LRRP, before the designation was official, before the doctrine existed on paper, before the Army had decided whether it wanted to know what it was doing or just do it. They went where the maps said there was nothing, and found out what was actually there and came back with the information, and sometimes they did not come back. And the ratio of who came back to who did not was the central mathematical fact of August Fenimore's professional life from 1965 to 1969, and the shadow of that ratio had never fully left him. The man behind him, close enough to touch, was Corporal James Tully, 21 years old, from Wichita, Kansas, here on this particular installation's particular soil, in a different century and a different life. Tully was the best point man August had ever worked with, which meant he was still alive, because the best point men had something the merely good ones didn't. Not faster reflexes, not better eyes, but a quality of attention that extended past the body, a forward-reaching awareness that Tully himself described once as just knowing that something was in the way before he could tell you what it was. He had saved August's life twice, and the patrol's life once, by that knowing, and August had never stopped being grateful for the practical, physical fact of James Tully's existence in the world. Tully was not behind him now. Tully had been behind him for 6 hours, and now the trail turned, and there was an opening in the canopy, and the light came down in a shaft, and Tully was in it, on the ground, and the single sound August had processed in the 300ths of a second before he moved to cover had been enough to tell him everything about what had happened, and nothing about whether it was over. It was not over. It went on for another 40 minutes, in the way that certain things go on, without adequate narrative, without the structure of an engagement that makes sense reviewed afterward, but with the full weight of what is actually at stake pressing down on every decision like that white-blue Kansas sky. August made 8 decisions in 40 minutes, and 7 of them were correct, and the 8th was correct enough. He got 6 men out. He carried one of them on his back for 400 meters through growth so dense that the distance took 30 minutes. He left 2 graves in the Central Highlands that he found again 30 years later through channels that should not have worked and did, and he had gone back and stood over them in the presence of a country that was no longer the country that had made those graves, and he had said what he needed to say, and he had come home. He did not know if Tully was one of those graves. He had not allowed himself to find out, which was its own answer, which he carried. The brass dog tag in his shirt pocket had been made in the summer of 1965 by Master Sergeant Harold Vance, who was dead now, a stroke in 1998, peacefully, in a house in Topeka, who had stamped it himself because he said aluminum was for men who planned to come home in the standard way, and Harold Vance had looked at August Fenimore for long enough to suspect he was going to do it some other way. The tag had been in that pocket or its equivalent for 57 years. It had been in the jungle and in Beirut and at 2 funerals where August Fenimore had stood at attention and watched coffins and kept his face the way he kept everything. Controlled, present, not absent. It had been in the pocket of this pale blue shirt this morning in Kansas in July, when a 23-year-old specialist knocked his coffee out of his hand and laughed, and it was in that pocket now as August Fenimore stood in the PX parking lot and watched the young man walk away and understood very clearly that the young man had no idea what he had just put his shoulder into. The parking lot returned, fully, with its heat and its asphalt and its sparrow and its distant artillery. August released the dog tag through the fabric of his shirt. He looked once more in the direction Doyle had gone. Then he turned and walked toward the PX entrance with the unhurried deliberateness of a man who came here for a reason and intends to complete it. Across the parking lot, leaning against a white pickup truck with her keys in her hand and her phone half raised, and her face carrying an expression that had moved well past discomfort into something more purposeful, was a woman named Sergeant First Class Diana Moser. She was 36 years old, stationed at Riley, with 14 years of service and the particular quality of attention that comes to people who have spent careers in roles where missing things has consequences. She had seen all of it, the shoulder, the coffee, the second contact, the laugh. She had stood still for 10 seconds after Doyle walked away, during which time she was deciding something. And then she had stopped deciding and made the call. She called the battalion operations desk and gave them Doyle's name and rank and unit and told them what she had seen. Her voice was flat and precise, the voice of a written report delivered verbally. She identified herself. She gave the location and the approximate time. She said the civilian he struck appeared to be elderly, male, wearing a blue shirt. She said the name on his visitor badge, which she had been close enough to read when he bent to pick up the cup. She gave it. The operations sergeant on duty said, "Say that name again." She said it again. There was a silence that lasted 3 seconds and was nothing like the silences that preceded ordinary calls. When the ops sergeant spoke again, his voice had undergone the kind of change that voices undergo when information arrives that reorganizes the room it lands in. He said, "Stay where you are, First Sergeant Moser." He had promoted her by 2 grades without noticing. He said, "Is he still on the installation?" She confirmed it. He said the phrase that Diana Moser had heard, said seriously perhaps twice in her 14 years at 4 different installations, "I'm going to need you to hold." He did not make one call. He made 3 in 90 seconds, moving up a chain of command so fast that 2 of the 3 calls were received by people who were in the middle of other things, and set those other things down immediately and completely, in the way that certain kinds of information make all prior activities irrelevant. The battalion commander. The brigade commander. And the brigade commander, on hearing the name, made a call that went not up but sideways, to a number on his personal phone, to a man who was not in his chain of command, and who picked up on the second ring. In 3 separate locations on Fort Riley, the headquarters building, the officers' quarters annex, and a conference room in the training complex where a quarterly readiness review had been proceeding for 45 minutes. 3 phones rang or buzzed within 4 minutes of each other. 3 men looked at their screens. 3 conversations were short. 3 men were in motion. Major General William Cord, commanding general of the 1st Infantry Division, was out of his chair before the call ended. Brigadier General Steele Wavington, the Assistant Division Commander for Maneuver, was in his vehicle before the call ended. Major General Patricia Solis, 3rd Army Deputy Operations, visiting Fort Riley for the quarterly review, set her briefing materials down with a care and deliberateness that told her aide everything, and her aide was already pulling up the vehicle. 3 vehicles. 2 minutes. Doyle was in the day room of his barracks building, laughing at something on his phone, when his squad leader came through the door at a pace that Doyle had not previously seen his squad leader move, and said, in a voice that Doyle had not previously heard from his squad leader, "On your feet. Get your cover. Get outside right now." The squad leader's face had the particular quality of a man carrying information that he does not have full context for, and has correctly identified as extremely serious. Doyle got to his feet. He put on his cover. He went outside. He had been in the parking lot 2 blocks from the barracks when the vehicles arrived, and it was the vehicles he noticed first. 3 staff cars in convoy moving with the compressed certainty of vehicles that are not stopping, pulling up in front of the PX with doors opening before they had fully stopped, and then the stars. And then the understanding that the stars were here. And then the further understanding, arriving slowly and then all at once, that the stars were here because of something that had happened in this parking lot 40 minutes ago. August Fenimore had completed his business at the PX and was standing near the entrance with a plastic bag in one hand when the vehicles arrived. He watched them with the same unhurried assessment he brought to everything. He saw the stars, and he recognized 2 of the faces before the 3rd vehicle had finished stopping, and something in his expression shifted, not surprise, not pleasure exactly, but the recognition of a man who has been found by people who know how to find people, and who is not entirely sure he needed finding, but has decided to let them do what they came to do. Major General Cord reached him first. He was 53 years old, West Point, 31 years of service, and he had known the name August Fenimore since he was a captain reading the history of long-range reconnaissance in Vietnam for a professional development course, and he had known the man for 11 years, and when he crossed the PX parking lot and stopped in front of him. What he felt was not the professional gravity of a 2-star general responding to an incident involving a legendary figure. It was the feeling of a man who has arrived somewhere he should have been sooner. He came to attention. His right hand came up in a salute that was the sharpest, most breathtakingly precise salute Sergeant First Class Diana Moser, who had been rendering and receiving salutes for 14 years on 4 installations and had been present for the arrival of 6 generals at various functions, had ever witnessed. Beside him, half a step behind, Brigadier General Wavington came to attention and rendered the same. And behind them both, Major General Patricia Solis, 3rd Army, stepped forward and stood and saluted. And the 3 salutes were held, and the parking lot was absolutely still. Specialist Kevin Doyle stood 20 feet away with his squad leader at his shoulder and watched 3 general officers salute an old man in a pale blue shirt in the PX parking lot at Fort Riley, Kansas, in the white heat of a July afternoon. He did not look like someone who had just been laughing. The salutes came down. Major General Cord spoke. He did not address the parking lot. He did not perform for the assembled soldiers and civilians who had stopped moving when the vehicles arrived. He spoke to the incident commander from the military police who had arrived just after the staff cars, and he spoke in the even, unhurried voice of a man who is stating the institutional position of the United States Army on a matter that is not complicated. He said that the incident report would reflect a formal charge under Article 128 of the Uniform Code of Military Justice, assault. He said the command would review the matter of character and judgment at the rank of Specialist Doyle. He said that the review would be thorough. He said these things without looking at Doyle, which communicated more than looking at him would have. Then he turned to August Fenimore, and he said, quietly, in the voice of a man speaking only to the man in front of him, "I am sorry this happened on this installation. I am sorry you were treated this way on ground that you helped make." August Fenimore looked at him. He was quiet for a moment in the way that very composed people are quiet when they are deciding how much of what they actually feel to express. Then he said, "I'm not fragile, Will." He said it not unkindly. With the wry precision of a man who has absorbed harder things and is not in need of excessive concern about this one. The general almost smiled. It did not quite arrive. The weight of the moment was too close for it. He said, "No, you never were." The two of them stood in the parking lot in the July heat, and around them the installation had gone very quiet in the way it goes quiet when it understands that something is being witnessed that should be witnessed, and the white-blue Kansas sky went all the way to the horizon in every direction. The military police spoke to Doyle. His squad leader stood beside him. His face had gone through several expressions and was now in a place that was not any of them, the face of someone who has understood something not gradually but all at once, which is the harder way to understand things. He had his hands clasped in front of him and his eyes on the ground, and he was not laughing. August Fenimore walked to where Doyle stood. He did not walk quickly. He moved with the unhurried deliberateness he had moved with all his life, the pace of a man who is not chasing anything because he has nowhere particular to be and has always known that the things worth arriving at will wait. He stopped in front of Doyle. He said nothing for a moment. He let the silence do what silences do when they are left alone, gather weight, acquire dimensions, make room for what needs to be in them. Then he said, "I was your age once," in a place where the consequences of inattention were immediate and permanent. He paused. The dog tag was in his pocket. Tully was gone, and it was not raining, and the Midwest summer air was soft and full of cut grass. What I learned there, the thing that matters above everything else, is that every person you put your hands on in contempt is a whole world you have decided doesn't count. He looked at Doyle steadily. You cannot afford that. Not as a soldier. Not as anything. He paused once more. The world is larger than your certainty, son. It always will be. He nodded once. He picked up his plastic bag. He walked to his car and drove off the installation. It took the Army 12 days to complete the formal process. Specialist Kevin Doyle received a reduction in rank to Private First Class, a formal reprimand that entered his permanent record, and an assignment to a remedial values and leadership development course that was, by the Army's institutional design, not punitive, but corrective. He completed it without incident. He did not complain. 9 weeks later, on a Saturday morning in October, August Fenimore was at the hardware store on Sarber Lane in Junction City, a mile from the main gate, filling a small basket with galvanized screws and a replacement hinge for the storm door at the back of his house. He was at the fastener aisle when he heard someone stop at the end of it. He looked up. Private First Class Kevin Doyle was standing at the end of the fastener aisle in civilian clothes, jeans, a plain gray t-shirt, and he looked like a young man who has been carrying something for 9 weeks and has decided that today is the day he puts it down. He was thinner than he had been in the parking lot. The easy confidence was gone from his posture, replaced by something less assembled and more honest. He crossed the aisle and stopped in front of the old man, and he said, plainly, without qualification, without asking for anything in return, "I'm sorry. I was wrong. What I did was wrong. I'm sorry." August Fenimore looked at him for a long moment. He looked at the young man's face, which was open in the way that faces are open when the performance has been put down and there is nothing left but the actual person. He reached into his basket and held out a box of galvanized screws. "Hold these a moment," he said. Doyle took the box. August Fenimore examined the hinges on the rack, selected the one he needed, and took the box of screws back. He put them in his basket. He looked at the young man. "You have a long time ahead of you," he said. "Use it." He went to find the rest of what he needed, and the hardware store went on around him the way hardware stores go on. Indifferent, well lit, smelling of lumber and machine oil, and he moved through it with the steady, unhurried ease of a man who has been to the worst places the world contains, and come back to find that a replacement storm door hinge is a satisfying problem, that the ordinary Saturday is not a consolation prize but the whole point. Some of them walk among us in pale blue shirts with brass in their pockets, and no need to tell you what the brass means. If you were moved by August's story of quiet dignity and hard-earned grace, hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to see it. And be sure to subscribe to Veterans Valor for more stories of America's unassuming heroes.